they absorb these kind of mischievous oxygen radicals, molecules, atoms, and disarm them. And as we age, we produce a lot of these oxygen radicals, and they're implicated in aging and cancer. So antioxidants are a way to kind of quiet that response, and they have health benefits. They also help you detoxify your body. So, but my point is kind of, you don't need to know what an antioxidant is to have the benefit of an antioxidant. You know, we've been benefiting from them for thousands of years without really having to worry what they are. They're in whole foods, and it's one of the reasons whole foods are good for you. And they're not that much in processed foods.
Isn't it odd that the more you put into foods, so that's processing foods, the less expensive it is. The simpler you keep it. Getting whole foods in this day and age in this country, it's extremely expensive.
Yeah. Well, there are reasons of policy that is the case. You're absolutely right. Most processed foods are made from these very cheap raw ingredients. I mean, they're basically corn, soy, and wheat. And if you look at all those very hard to pronounce ingredients on the back of that processed food, those are fractions of corn and some petroleum, but a lot of corn and soy and wheat. And the industry's preferred mode of doing business is to take the cheapest raw materials and create complicated foodstuffs from it. The reason those raw ingredients are so cheap, though, is because these are precisely the ones that the government chooses to support. The subsidies, you know, the big subsidy, $26 billion for corn and soy and wheat and rice. So it's no accident that these should be the ones grown abundantly and cheap. And that's one of the reasons the industry moved down this path. There was such a surfeit of cheap corn and soy that the food scientists got to work turning it into...
getting away totally from sugar to corn syrup.
Yeah, that's right. And there's very little sugar in our processed food. It's all high fructose corn syrup, which in effect the government is subsidizing.
Cottonseed oil, is it regulated by the FDA? Is it considered a food, even though it's in so many of the processed foods we eat?
Is it considered a food? Yeah, I think it's...
I was wondering because to do with the pesticide that is in it, that if it's done for cotton, it doesn't matter how much pesticide there is, but if it's for food, it does matter. And it's in so much to keep it stable for so long on the shelf.
That's right. That's right. And it's a food I would avoid. I mean, humans have not been eating cotton for most of their history. They've been wearing it, and now we're eating it. And you're right, it receives an enormous amount of pesticide as a crop. How many residues are in the oil, I don't really know the answer, but it has been approved by the FDA as a foodstuff. And but it's one of these novel oils that I'm inclined to stay away with. I mean, my basic philosophy of eating is, if your great-grandmother wasn't familiar with it, you probably want to stay away from it.
Michael Pollan is our guest. Talk about, well, you started with a New York Times piece called Unhappy Meals. And in it, and you expand on this in Defense of Food, you talk about the McGovern Report, 1977, 30 years ago?
Well, that's really, I think, one of the red-letter days in the rise of nutritionism as a way of thinking about food. It was a very interesting moment. McGovern convened this set of hearings to look at the American diet. And there was a great deal of concern about heart disease at the time. We were having, after a fall-off during the war in heart disease, there was a big spike in the 50s and 60s, and scientists were busy trying to figure out what was going on and very worried about it. McGovern convened these hearings, took a lot of testimony, and then came out with a set of guidelines. And he said, he implicated red meat, basically, in this problem. And he said, we're eating too much red meat. And the advice of the government became, the official advice, eat less red meat. And he said as much. Now, that was a very controversial message. The meat industry, in fact, the whole food industry went crazy. And they came down on him like a ton of bricks. You can't tell people to eat less of anything.
As Oprah learned when she said she wanted to eat hamburgers.
Exactly. This is just a taboo topic in America. So, McGovern had to beat this hasty retreat, and he rewrote the guidelines to say, choose meats that will lessen your saturated fat intake. Something nobody understood at all, and was much to the, and that was acceptable. But you see the transition. It's very interesting. We've been talking about a whole food, eat less red meat, which probably was good advice, to this very complicated construct, eat meats that have less of this nutrient. It's still an affirmative message, eat more, which is fine with industry, just eat a little differently. And suddenly the focus was on saturated fat, as if we knew that that was the nutrient in the red meat that was the problem. And in fact, it may not be. I mean, there are other things going on in red meat we're learning that may be the problem.
Like?
Well, some people think it's the protein in red meat. Some people think it's the nitrosamines, these various compounds that are produced when you cook red meat. We see a correlation between high red meat consumption and higher rates of cancer and heart disease. But again, we don't know exactly what the cause is, but it may not be saturated fat.
And then the political economy of, for example, eating meat?
Well, because of that, I mean, that's why McGovern lost in 1980. I mean, the beef lobby went after him, and they tossed him out. And but from then on, anyone who would pronounce on the American diet understood you had to speak in this very obscure language of nutrients. You could talk about saturated fat, you could talk about antioxidants, but you cannot talk about whole foods. So that is the kind of official language in which we discuss nutrition. Conveniently, it's very confusing to the average consumer. Conveniently to the industry, they love talk about nutrients because they can always, with processed foods, unlike whole foods, you can redesign it. You can just reduce the saturated fat, up the antioxidants. You can jigger it in a way you can't change broccoli. Broccoli is going to be broccoli, but a processed food can always have more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff. So the industry loves nutritionism for that reason.
So for people who don't have much money, how do they eat? I mean, when you're talking about whole foods, they have to be prepared, and if you don't have much time as well, processed foods are cheaper and they're faster.
Well, processed foods, fast food seems cheap. I mean, if you have the time and the inclination to cook, you can eat more cheaply. But you do, as you say, you do need the time and you do need the skills to cook. There's no way around the fact that given the way our food policies are set up, such that whole foods are expensive and getting more expensive and processed foods tend to be cheaper. I mean, if you go into the supermarket, the cheapest calories are added fat and added sugar from processed food, and the more expensive calories are over in the produce section. And we have to change policy in order to adjust that.
How do you do that?
You need a farm bill that basically evens the playing field and is not driving down the price of high fructose corn syrup, so that real fruit juice can compete with it. You need a farm bill that makes carrots competitive with Wonder Bread, and we don't have that, and we didn't get it this time around.
Do you feel like any candidates are addressing this issue?
No, because they all pass through Iowa and they all bow down before conventional agricultural policy. In office, I think that, there have been, Hillary Clinton has had some very positive food policies, basically because she has this big farm constituency upstate, and she's very, very interested in school lunch and farm-to-school programs and things like that. John Edwards has said some progressive things about feedlot agriculture and what's wrong with that while he was in Iowa. Feedlots are where we grow meat. These huge factory farms that have become really the scourge of landscapes in places like Iowa and Missouri. I mean, these giant pig confinement operations that basically collect manure in huge lagoons that leak when it rains, and smell for miles around. I mean, they're just miserable places, and they're becoming a political issue in the Midwest. And I think they will become a political issue nationally because people are very concerned about the status of the animals in these places. My worry is, though, that when we start regulating these feedlots, they'll move to Mexico.
Michael Pollan's latest book is In Defense of Food, An Eater's Manifesto. We'll come back to him in a minute.
To eat apples and bananas. I like to eat apples and bananas. Oh, I like to eat apples and bananas. Bananas? That's right, I like to eat apples and bananas. I like to eat apples and bananas. I like to eat apples and bananas. Oh, I like to eat apples and bananas.
Apples and Bananas by Raffi and the Rise and Shine Band. That one's for David and Paige. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we return to our conversation with award-winning author and journalist Michael Pollan. His latest book is called In Defense of Food, An Eater's Manifesto. I asked him about his earlier book, the acclaimed bestseller, The Omnivore's Dilemma.
The omnivore's dilemma is if you're a creature like us that can eat almost anything. I mean, unlike cows that only eat grass or koala bears that only eat eucalyptus leaves, we can eat a great many different things, and meat and vegetables, but it's complicated. We don't have instincts to tell us exactly what to eat, so we need a lot of other cognitive equipment to navigate what is a very treacherous food landscape, because as there was in the jungle and in nature, there are poisons out there that could kill us. So we had to learn what was safe and what wasn't. And we had this thing called culture that told us, like, that mushroom there, somebody ate it last week and they died. So let's call it the death cap. And that way we'll remember that that's one to stay away from. And, so culture is how we navigate this. We are once again in a treacherous food landscape when there are many things in the supermarket that are not good for you.